everyone, and welcome to Conversations with Kate. I'm so happy tonight to have as my guests a dynamic duo, namely the Reverend Betsy Anderson and her daughter, Dr. Neville Anderson of Larchmont Pediatrics. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
It's so much fun to have the two of you here. I can't tell you. And not only because of your general wonderfulness, but because between the two of you, you really have such a host of memories about the whole St. James experience. And I think that by listening to some of your stories tonight, we're going to get such a fascinating perspective of some of the chapters in our history as a church. But before we really even turn the page on the first chapter, I'm just curious, are you both native Angelenos? Were you both born right here in LA?
In the same neighborhood. We both really grew up in the same neighborhood, right around the church.
Right around the church. And so I'm wondering, Betsy, starting with you, can you share with us, what is your first memory of St. James?
So my first memory, I was baptized at age 5 by George Barrett, who was the rector of St. James at that time. And then my mom and dad were not churchgoers. So, but from the beginning, we went to Sunday school. And always. And in my day, there were lots of kids in the Sunday school, and we had carpools to Sunday school. So wouldn't necessarily fly today. And I didn't try that with Neville and her brother Mark, but that was my experience. So off to church we were.
Do you remember? I'm not trying to start trouble with this question, but do you ever remember pushing back on your parents and saying, we're at church, but you're not. What is that all about? Or was it just the way it was?
It was
never crossed your mind?
And we loved being with our friends. So, there were carpool to church, and then we were all in the same Sunday school class. And in those days, Sunday school was the first part of it was during church, as this was also pre-1979 prayer book, when it was morning prayer every Sunday except once a month. So the kids were in Sunday school for the whole time. And then we went to church once a month. We went in for communion. So.
I see. So going to church school with all of your friends was just what everybody did, right?
Everybody
just
did.
What you did. Yeah. Okay. Now, what about you, Neville? What is your first memory of St. James?
Well, really, my first memory of St. James is being at St. James School. And I was actually in Mrs. Kamula's very first class. She was the aide in the kindergarten, and the school was actually on Gramercy Place. Mm-hmm. And then halfway through my kindergarten year, we moved over to where the school is now on St. Andrews. And it was around that time that I had been baptized in Emmanuel Presbyterian. And we had been going to Emmanuel Presbyterian, and sometime around the time that I started at St. James School, we switched over to St. James Church. And then I started going to Sunday school every day, or every Sunday.
every Sunday, is that what you just said?
Yeah.
Do you feel like part of the reason that it made sense to switch to St. James was because you were at the school, that sort of continuity with the school?
I think so. I think my mom probably could answer better to it, but it's also, it's the continuity with where she had grown up also. Yeah. So, and it was closer to where we lived.
Closer to where you lived, right. So what about that, Betsy? What made you all decide to?
Started out at Emmanuel because kids were, Neville was in preschool there. And so at that time, we didn't know the priest at St. James because we had, we were more involved at Emmanuel. Leave it at that. Mm-hmm. So at that time, we were looking for schools post preschool, and St. James had the school that we wanted, mm-hmm. and so we decided to make the switch. And at that time, Bob Oliver had just arrived, and along with him, David Miller. And so we made the switch to St. James. It was going home for me. And Neville's dad had not grown up in the Episcopal Church, but took a great liking to St. James. Involved completely. So it was really the arrival of Bob Oliver and David Miller that solidified our journey.
Yeah. And I'm wondering if some of the people who'll be listening to us tonight also hearken back to that Bob Oliver and David Miller period. It sounds like they were part of the draw.
Right. Yes. I mean, Bob had come from the American Cathedral in Paris, and he was he really wanted to bring St. James alive, and he made some very good hires with David and Mark Lisk, and they were really great with the kids, and so we just became completely committed. And David's wife Sarah taught at St. James School, 5th grade. Neville.
So there was
a 4th grade.
Tissue. Yeah, connective tissue in all those ways. Yeah, and so I want to ask a few more Sunday school questions. So Betsy, I was beginning to ask you this before we went on the air. What did you wear to Sunday school as a little girl?
Those were the days when girls wore hats and gloves and dresses to Sunday school. I mean, we were in our Sunday best. And
what did the boys wear? Did they wear suit coats or ties or anything like that?
I think they did. You know, the concept of wearing your Sunday best was still very much in vogue.
Interesting. And by the time you went to church school, Neville, was it still fancy like that?
Yeah, we dressed up, but I don't think my brother necessarily wore a suit coat and tie, but he would wear like a button-down shirt and pants, or probably his gray shorts. And I think most of the time I wore a dress to Sunday school. I don't think I wore pants. So maybe not. I didn't wear a hat. I didn't have white gloves, but I think I wore my.
We missed out. I'm so every now and then in churches that I've known, I've opened an old drawer and found a pair of tiny white gloves. And it's such a strange reminder that there was this, and I'm sure lots of people who are part of St. James and have been for a long time remember those days. And one of the things I like is how a lot of our parishioners still do dress up for church, and we still have quite a few hat wearers. Not quite a few, a few. And I love that. At Easter, right? What about on Easter? That's when the hats really came out.
I do think I wore an Easter hat most years. Also I used to wear those little short white ankle socks with my black patent leather Mary Janes.
I know. I remember visiting my grandmother's church and wearing that same thing, and I loved it. So what was it like for you, Betsy, growing as a child at St. James Church? What are some of the how would you characterize that era for you?
First of all, there were so many kids in the Sunday school that we were divided by grade and by girls and boys. So the 6th grade girls were in one classroom, the 6th grade boys were in another classroom. I mean, imagine having space for all. And we were in the old parish hall. And it had a gym on the top floor, which was, by the time we were there, it was condemned, so nobody could go and use it. But there were just a lot of kids. That was the 50s. That's what we did.
That's whatever it was. That was the culture, right? Yeah.
Right.
And was Sunday school sort of a chalk and talk style back then, or were there activities?
I don't really remember. What I do, and the teachers were not, as I recall, were older. One of the most significant stories in my own formation and journey to the priesthood was my 7th grade teacher that this was a girls' class, 7th graders, and we were really bad to her. I must confess, we were not very, about my age, probably younger. But she told us in a dream that she'd had a dream and she had met Jesus in the dream. Well, we thought she was crazy. But what I later learned was that, and as part of my own formation, was that she was absolutely right. And it was that kind of experience that she was willing to talk about and talk to us about, that gave Christian faith and Christian spirituality a very personal experience. And I have never forgotten it. I will always remember her.
Well, you're remembering that even though you all were not kind to her, she was willing to open up and share with you something really personal about her relationship with Jesus. And so what is it about that is it the courage that it took for her to do that? Or is it the life that she was leading, that would be part of her experience?
I think she was very dedicated, and that her Sunday school teaching was really her vocation. It was her response to all that. And taking on 7th grade girls was no easy feat.
No joke, right.
I think it was just her authenticity and the realness of her faith that spoke volumes to me.
It sounds like it stayed. Did it speak volumes to you at the time, or is it something that kind of came back to you?
Absolutely came back to me. We thought she was kind of, but she was not. And I'm publicly confessing my sin.
That's the worst sin you can come up with. Being a bratty 7th grader. Wow. What?
A very holy person, I now see.
Very holy person. And it's such a great reminder, I think, that the things that we say and do in our lives, we might not see the impact that they have. But the impact is there all the same. So right. I'm also wondering if, Betsy, when you were so in the 50s as a child in church school, wasn't that the era when church, not just St. James, but all churches, had a country club feel? I mean, it was what you did.
Right. And St. James at that time drew, I think, and I could be wrong about this, but I think St. James really drew a lot from the surrounding neighborhood, the Larchmont area. And so we all knew each other. We were all, we went to school together. Our parents knew each other. And that changed later on. And there was a group that left and went out to Beverly Hills. But there was still a strong core of people that stayed together at St. James.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So the first chapter that we can really talk about when we talk about your all's experiences of St. James is your childhood in the 50s with the white gloves and the hat. And in Betsy, in your experience, what would the next chapter after that be?
Well, I think with the coming of Sam D'Amico and the civil rights, which was, I went through confirmation at St. James, and then I left to go to college, and later on in high school, I was not as active a part of St. James. But when the civil rights movement began and Sam D'Amico was rector, he was very supportive of that. Marched in Selma, I think. I may be wrong, but I remember that. And as a result, some people were attracted to that and some people were not. And so a large number that were not left. But I think all of us then my recollection is that the diversity of the community, the Caribbean Africans, the people, the Africans, African immigrants, and the just brought a great diversity that really began the next chapter at St. James, which is the one that's, I think, is culminating with the richness of who we are. The Korean congregation would come later with
Right. So you're saying that St. James began to diversify during Sam D'Amico's time? And this was in the 60s, right?
I think so. Yeah.
And isn't Sam D'Amico also the one who had the idea to start the school? What's the story there?
Well, Sam had always had a dream of starting an Episcopal school. He had gone to, I think, Andover or one of the schools back east that had an affiliation with the Episcopal Church, and he thought church schools could be both excellent academically and spiritually, and his dream was to do that, and they were able to begin to realize the dream when the church committed to buying the Neville property, which is on the site now of the present school. So they bought that and made the commitment to it. It was a big risk, and then they bought the apartment on Gramercy, which is where Neville started, and Sam was and the rector, wasn't he, Neville? I think he was both.
Yes.
He was the headmaster and the rector? And your school was an apartment?
It was the old apartment.
It was an old apartment building, and they had trailers in the back for most of the grades. But as kindergartners, we got to be in the main building. Uh-huh. And Sam D'Amico's wife was like with her. And I had to do like a hearing test, and I had to play some games and such. So yeah, it was an old apartment building.
What are some of your early memories, Neville, of starting at the school?
Well, Mrs. Werner, who I think was the first teacher at St. James, and she was my kindergarten teacher, and she talked about having an alligator under her desk, that if we misbehaved, the alligator was going to come out and get us.
Oh gosh. And so did that work?
It worked for me. Yes, it did work for me, at least. I don't know, like all the boys in our class, that it really worked for them, but it worked for me. And I also remember that I remember when President Reagan was elected, and so I thought that meant that he was president right away. And then, of course, his inauguration was a couple of months later, and I was super confused because I thought he was already president. And but I do remember Mrs. Werner talking about him being elected and explaining the inauguration process to us. So
this is in
that was
kindergarten? You remember that? Wow.
Yes.
Wow. And how did it feel having Neville and probably later Peter too at St. James School? Were you, Betsy, were you feeling good and confident about the place?
Absolutely. I was so excited that we could have both the academic program and the spiritual formation going on at the same time. And a lot of our friends' kids were going there, and it was a time of great synergy in the community.
And so that was the Sam D'Amico era, and it sounds like it was a really significant era. If our church got to diversify, and we got to have the school, which is such a treasured institution to this day. I mean, that was quite an era, wasn't it?
It began, actually, now I'm thinking that Chuck Rowans came when, Neville, you were in first grade, I think, right?
In second grade.
So it was in that window when she was in kindergarten and first and second grade. There was a real spirit of adventure as we were all.
What's an example of that spirit of adventure that you can remember?
Sorry?
What's an example of that spirit of adventure, gave you that feeling back then?
Well, I think that we were all excited about the new school building, and we were excited that we were part of something new. So I remember that and there was some of it was unknown. So I think all the parents who had made the decision to send their kids to St. James School were there was a spirit of anticipation and excitement that this new, and there's going to be all those resources and facilities are just terrific, and we're on the front end. Very exciting. We didn't know exactly what.
Was this the only K-6 Episcopal school around?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
I know Campbell Hall maybe, and St. Matthews.
If you're talking about around in the St. James area,
in the 60s.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
There was St. Matthews out in Pacific Palisades. Neville's right, Campbell Hall. I think there were some other ones, but
not very close, really. They're quite a few miles away. So,
I was going to say,
Nico around? Did he have a long tenure at St. James?
Yes, I think he did. I don't remember exactly what his years were, but yes, it was a full career there.
And then
I was gonna say, if he came in the 60s and he left, I think Bob Oliver came in like 1980 or 1981, right? And then he retired as head of school in like 1982. So.
So wait, so he stayed on as head of school even after Bob Oliver was the head, the rector?
Yeah, for a couple years.
Oh, that's interesting. So they worked together. That's great. And then Bob Oliver, was he around for a long time?
Yes, he was. I can't remember exactly how long he was around.
Well, so I think he was around. He probably left in like 1991, 92.
Mm-hmm.
So he was there probably 12, 13 years.
You were saying earlier that Bob Oliver's idea and his mission was to bring things alive in another sort of way. How would you characterize that bringing alive that he was about?
Two things. One, Bob was he was very interested in building the diversified community. He really encouraged and welcomed that. He also really thought that music would be a great outreach. So he really seeded the great music at St. James concept with concerts, saw it as a way to reach the larger community. And then he had been the dean of the cathedral in Jackson, Mississippi, and they had a school, a cathedral school there. I'm pretty sure I had this right. John Thies will correct me if I'm wrong, but they had a cathedral school, so he really knew what parish schools were and where the pitfalls were and where the sensitivities were and where the opportunities were. So the combination of his having had a church with a school, as well as his vision of outreach and excellence in liturgy and music, I think and with the school developing, with St. James School developing, just brought it all together.
Well, that's what it sounds like when I hear you talk about building diversity, seeding music, and really leaning into the church with a school. That sounds so much like what St. James has become. It sounds like he really built on D'Amico's vision and grew it.
Yep.
Yeah.
He did.
Yeah.
And he hired assistants also.
He hired assistants. Right. Like David Miller, who went on to lead St. Matthew's Pacific Palisades, your dear friend, right?
Right. Yeah.
So what do you remember about Neville, about the Bob Oliver era, that chapter in St. James?
Yeah. So, well, one funny story was my mom and dad, we always sat in the very first row right under the pulpit because that way my brother and I would actually pay attention. And Sunday, in those days, Sunday school was before church. So we would go early to Sunday school and then we would go into church. So we had to be there for the whole service. And so one Sunday, Bob Oliver was preaching about something to do with like his shoes, and he lost his shoe, or he only brought one shoe on a trip, or something like that. And so then the following week, we get back, and my brother leans over and asks, "Do you think he ever found his shoe?" And that was, I think, it showed that it worked that my parents had us sit in the front row because we paid attention.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
sounds like you did. That's so cute. That's adorable. So,
Yeah.
so the kids were there for the whole service?
Yes.
Wow.
Which was hard. I do remember that was it was kind of hard to pay attention the whole time, and then because we were sitting in the front row, we had to behave, or else,
A lot of
you
that's
know,
a
it
lot
was
of
right.
accountability.
It is.
So,
And then when I was in like 5th or 6th grade, I started acolyting and getting very involved with that aspect of it. So I'll never forget my first time acolyting. The crucifer didn't show up, and I was Glenn Gilmore, who's Diane Gilmore's son, and was in my class at St. James School as well as Sunday school with me. So I was told that I needed to do exactly what he did, like follow him around because he was going to be the torchbearer with me. But then the crucifer didn't. But then the crucifer didn't show up. So then he knew how to do the crucifer roles, and so they had, probably a Lem be the crucifer. Well, I think holding the cross, but then Glenn did all the roles of, helping the deacon set the table and bring the bread and the wine to the altar and such. So I was told that I needed to follow him, and so I was like following him, and I made so many mistakes.
Like a little baby duck, just following him.
Oh
my God.
So I he was giving the bread, and I brought up the wine or the water. I mean, I totally messed everything up, but I was told to follow him.
Though. No, it's so precious. I love that. You were not going to deviate. That was your one pathway.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. So was Canon Thies, was he in charge of the acolytes in those days? And was that before his time?
I don't know if they were there. She's probably 5 or 6 years younger than me. So his kids weren't involved or at least in acolyting and such when I was there.
Is there anybody else from that era, liturgically speaking, who's still around that I would know? Or was that just a crew of people?
Yeah, I'm trying to think, Mom.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I
mean, George Marks was in the choir.
Right. That's right. That's wonderful.
So, and Cliff
and
Challey.
Diane
Gilmore.
Right.
And Cliff Challey was with the Altar Guild stuff, and Ingrid Ralston, I know she's no longer with us, but she was a reader, and she got me to read sometimes. So when we didn't, there wasn't when my mom was in Sunday school, there was a ton of kids, but when I was there weren't a lot of kids. My Sunday school class was probably 5 to 10 kids for a good portion of it. Once I got into middle school, then there was 2 or 3 of us. And then by the time I got to high school, it was just me. And my mom was in charge of Christian education then. So of course I had to go to Sunday school, but it was me with 2 teachers, and I was not.
Well, now Betsy, what can we say about about societal currents and the history of church, not just St. James, at around the time that Neville was growing up?
Yeah. Well, I think it was part of this change. The other piece, I think, is that the kids were getting teaching. They were being taught religion at St. James School. So I think kids that would have otherwise been there with her were not. Were not going in those times, but it was changing, and there were other activities that were coming up. I remember Neville's brother Mark got really interested in rollerblade hockey, and his rollerblade hockey team was started playing on Sunday morning at 10:30 in Downey, and I about
Downey. That's a ways, yeah.
Because it was going to, and then soccer, AYSO was coming up, and they started playing on Sundays. And so the whole, that whole rhythm that we had was disrupted and would become even more disruptive. So I think, in some ways, maybe they were on the front edge of the curve of our socially and culturally of the church having a lot of competition on Sunday morning, whereas it didn't.
It seems like this would have been in the late 70s?
It was more the 80s.
80s, the 80s. I'm sorry, I'm not aging you. I'm just bad at math. It stopped being the expectation that on Sunday mornings, everyone in the culture went to church, right? Or a temple, or it just stopped being the expectation. And it seems like the people who ended up going to church were the people who actually chose to go to church above other choices, instead of it's just what you did. Yeah.
A radical, my experience, as a child at St. James, where everyone went to church.
That everyone went to church.
We just did it. But that was, it really did change. And I think that what we're talking about is the beginning of that. And we certainly see the effect of that, even more as time has gone on, as we've become a 24/7 economy.
Even in the time that I was a priest in New England, when I began, a lot of stores weren't open on Sundays, and then it changed, and everything was open on Sundays, and I think that had an impact too.
I once remember hearing somebody say, a student of Christian education saying, our biggest competition is not the church down the street. Our biggest competition is the NFL and AYSO and all of the activities that people have available to them.
Yes, yeah, all those other activities. And I've often wondered, I'm wondering if all those people who were sort of carried away by other interests, versus the people who either stayed or came back. I wonder if I don't know how to put it, but I wonder if spiritually the people who were feeling it stayed.
Huh?
And the people who were just doing it were less likely to stay.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true.
But it's a shame, because I think that if children are in church school, there's a chance for them to not just do it, but feel it. And then something might happen. For instance, Neville, you go to church to this day. You're an All Saints Beverly Hills leader, I know. So, so you made an adult choice to go to church.
I did. I mean, there are certainly times in my life where I didn't go to church, but I mean, I had no choice growing up. Like, this was what we did. And if I spent the night at a friend's house on a Saturday night, a lot of times I was picked up early the next morning to go to church. If it was a birthday party, like a slumber party, I could stay. But if it was, just going over to a friend's house, I would get picked up and go to church. And my parents also did bribe my brother and I a little bit by getting donuts on Sunday mornings to get us to go to church.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So I didn't know about the donuts. That's a great technique.
Yeah, it worked. It definitely worked. So, but yeah, and I think that I think that my mom again, she was in charge of Christian education, so she was really involved, and she did a lot of pastoral care stuff that she brought us into. So, for example, she we had there was this wonderful woman, Lucille Vine, and she was older and she was intellectually disabled. She lived in the St. James Manor, which is where the apartment building that the St. James School started at on Gramercy. So she was, I think, one of the first tenants there. But every Sunday she would have lunch at her friend's house, I think lived on Norton or Van Ness. And so my mom had to stay late because she was doing the Christian education stuff. But my dad and my brother and I would take Lucille to her friend's house. And actually, Lucille, she was quite the character, especially because she was intellectually disabled. So we had all sorts of kind of funny conversations with her, but she would not let us know where her friend lived. She said her friend didn't want us to know where she lived. So we would drop her off right on the corner, and she had her cane and she would walk down. And she always, she often had, most of the time she was wearing a hat, and she was wearing her Sunday best and her stockings and everything. And then we also, and then at Christmas time, we, along with the Martins, Vicki and Neil Martin and their kids, we would decorate a tabletop Christmas tree and take that over to her apartment in the St. James Manor so that she had a Christmas tree. So,
oh, that's wonderful. That's one of the things about church, isn't it? That it really exposes children to people of all ages, different backgrounds. It's such an education in being part of the whole world instead of just the kids you see at school every week or your relatives. So
very much so.
We've talked about the San D'Amico era. We've talked about the Bob Oliver era. And now I'm curious, is the next era Kirk Smith, the next chapter?
Yeah. Yes, it is.
Yeah. So what can you tell me about that chapter in the life of St. James? What stands out about that chapter?
Well, my recollection, I was on the search committee that called, and Mary Nichols was the head of it. And Kirk was from Old Lyme, Connecticut, and came out here with his family. And he was young. He's very smart, and I think he brought a kind of, the bar was high theologically with Kirk, and so I think he challenged people in a very good way. He also, in those days, well, by that time I was on the vestry, and I was the volunteer, the lay head of the Christian education program, and Kirk was very supportive of the ministry of lay people and lay leaders. He really valued that, and he was also very thoughtful about who was called into that kind of ministry and whether they had the equipment to do it. But he always supported us, and was. So
this was a time when wasn't it? This was a time when there was more and more of a focus on lay ministry.
Generally speaking, we were beginning to really reach out and realize that the old Father Knows Best era was past and passing into the ministry of all of us. And I remember when I interviewed Kirk and he asked me about my own ministry at St. James, and this was before ordination. He said, I said, well, I really feel called to be a Sunday school teacher and to work with a Sunday school, because I feel like Sunday school is probably one of the most important things we do in the formation of children into adults. And he said, you felt called to be a Sunday school teacher. He said, I really like that, and was very supportive of it. So I think it was he had an assistant, Clayton Thomason. Was it Clayton Neville, right? Clayton was Kirk's assistant, and the two of them were really a really good duo and worked well together.
So supportive of lay ministry. Was it during Kirk's time that you received your own call to ordained ministry?
Yes, it was during that time that I sensed the call, and it was
Received that call sounds a little too direct. Coming in.
It was mainly the feast day of Julian of Norwich, and I went and told him about that I was sensing that call, and he he was very supportive of it. Ginny Irwin was really the one that consolidated it for me, and she, as the second woman priest at St. James, although I do not remember the first one, but because I must have been away at the time, but Ginny very much was supportive of my taking the risk and stepping out and doing.
Was seeing Jenny being a priest part of what made you able to see yourself as a priest?
Yes, I really appreciate her spiritual energy, and we had a woman priest in our midst who was really good at what she did, and very committed and inspiring. And I got to know her well, and she was fun to be with, and a real person at the same time.
Wow. So it sounds like between Kirk and Clayton and Jenny, there were some really strong leaders during that era.
Yeah.
And I believe this was also an era when diversity was increasing at St. James, that more and more people of color were feeling comfortable.
Right.
Or maybe comfortable is an overstatement. I can't speak for what it was like to be an integrator of a formerly white church, but
well, we also from time to time, the different rectors had different relationships with the British consul in Los Angeles, and so we used to have Commonwealth Sunday, where we really celebrated the ministries of all, and St. James had a large Commonwealth community, diversity. So it began to be really lifted up and upheld, and Kirk very supportive of that. He picked up on where Bob Oliver took St. James.
In terms of the diversity, in terms of music as well?
Yes.
And then church and school, that was a little bit of a painful period. I don't know all that much about it, but I think that there was a bit of a clash between Kirk Smith and the head of the school, Chuck Rowan, right?
Yes, we were away in Connecticut at that time, so I wasn't first, personally and present. But I see it as a part of the evolution. As institutions and people grow, there are bumpy along the way, and the way in which we are able to incorporate those bumpy rides into the wholeness of who we can be, both corporately and collectively and personally, can make for a better, richer, more mature community.
Yeah, I don't think that I could imagine a complex organization anywhere that hasn't had periods of turmoil.
Yeah.
It's part of life. And one thing that always makes me so sad is when I hear people say, can you believe that terrible thing happened? And it's a church. Like somehow we are not going to behave badly, just like everybody else behaves badly in the world. That automatically makes us hypocrites. I think it would be hypocritical to think that we wouldn't behave badly. It's just, it's part of our human story, and it's part of that chapter, but only only part of it. That it sounds like that was such a rich time.
What's amazing to me is that St. James School, part of what we experienced was the kind of coming of age of St. James School, and in some ways the loss of innocence, when we could get into a situation that was bumpy, but then we would have to work our way through it. But I think one of the things that has always thrilled me about St. James School is that the community that Neville and Mark were a part of in those early days, the DNA is the same today as it was then. Different. St. James a long way in terms of its sophistication and the breadth of its offerings and the resources that it has. But the DNA is very similar, and I'm thrilled with that. I think.
Well, I want to ask Neville about that, because here you are in your career, Neville, working with children, and I know that you care about St. James School because you're an advisor to the head of school and very, very involved throughout this pandemic, certainly, and other times too. What do you carry with you from the St. James School experience that's been important to you in your life?
I think the number one thing was diversity. I mean, it was, we had Jewish people in our class. We had quite a few Korean, American, African American. So there was quite a bit of diversity, and I think being exposed to all those different cultures and people and was like wonderful. And I never understood why how people of other ethnicities and cultures and races can be treated differently, because to me, like, we're all the same. I grew up with them, we're not all the same. I think that's what I've really learned as an adult is we're not all the same. We haven't had the same experiences, but we're all humans. And coming, I think, from the St. James, the spiritual part of like, we're all children of God. We all should be loved. We all deserve the love of God and of our, like, and loving our neighbor as ourselves. So I think for me, that was really the thing that kind of has pervaded my life.
It's interesting. It's sort of at an early age, you got to live in a beloved community.
Yeah.
And that's something that's like, once you taste that, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's a part of why I've stuck with the church, is because, the church community really did love me and wanted to like help me. And I remember I decided to go away to boarding school for 11th and 12th grade. But I was still, when I came home for breaks and such, I was still very much a part of the community, and people were really interested in what I was doing, and it was always there. So
I've heard that kids who go to St. James School together stay connected in adulthood to a surprising degree.
It's true. I mean, many of my friends that I went to St. James with, I'm still in touch with, and for some of them, I'm their kid's doctor, which is
perfect.
fun.
That is amazing.
But
that's another continuity.
Yeah, but I will say, it was our 35th reunion. St. James School does not do reunions, but one of my classmates, Sammy Park, he wanted, his kids at the time were in preschool at St. James, and he wanted to do a reunion, and we got, I want to say 20 people from our class together, most of us who hadn't seen each other in that time, but some who we have. So
how fun. How fun.
Yeah.
So now,
then just,
mhm.
I was going to say, being part of the alumni kind of council and such, I've gotten to reconnect with a lot of St. James students, some who I didn't know when I was there. I was older, and of course you don't know the people who are younger than you, but it's really fun to kind of get to know them. And there's something about this shared experience growing up, even if we weren't there at the same time that we had, that brings us together.
So am I right that Kirk Smith left to become a bishop? Is that right? Was that the next step for him?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So off he went to become a bishop. And then I think the next priest, we're getting into to my modern era now for me, was the next priest Father Paul?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And we were away really at that time. That's when I started at the seminary and then at St. Matthew's. So then
right, you became a priest.
Right.
And yes, Jenny's friendship and Kirk's support and the sort of whatever was in the air or the water at St. James.
Yeah.
So you were off at Yale.
And then St. Matthew.
Then you were at St. Matthew's Pacific Palisades working with David Miller, who had been an associate rector at St. James. So there was that connection too, right? So what would you say are some of the hallmarks of, for some reason, I'm blanking on Paul's last name just in this moment.
Kowaleski.
Kowaleski, how could I forget? Because I know Mark. What were some of the hallmarks of his time from what you understand at St. James?
Well, most of what I know from my friend Mike Post, who's no longer with us. Yeah. But I think Paul challenged the congregation. He was a Roman Catholic before he became a Roman Catholic priest before he became an Episcopal priest, and I think he challenged the congregation, and others will know this better than I, but brought some of his Catholic traditions with him, and that was something that, to my recollection, St. James had not had as much of in the past.
So is that when we became more Anglo-Catholic in our worship style?
I believe so. I could be wrong. There's Jim Bonamani would know more, and but my sense is that was part of it. And along with that came, I think Paul had a real history of the best of the Roman Catholic spiritual tradition, and so exposed people to that more than others may have.
A number of adults at St. James have shared with me that their faith life was deepened tremendously by the adult education that he provided. And didn't he come a bit from the contemplative tradition too? So that was a different direction. I think he was deeply supportive of the music.
Right.
Yeah.
That should be mentioned too, and I think that's Al Davis, Father Al Davis, who was because he came from St. Thomas in Hollywood. He retired and he came to St. James. He looked a lot like Frank Brookhart, actually. It's kind of funny for me. Similar. And Al Davis was very wise. He was a former businessman, turned priest, and very wise and thoughtful. And I would say that during these years that we're talking about with Bob Oliver and Kirk, there was this Al Davis steady presence through all of it. And he was the interim, and I think really kept St. James going spiritually and pastorally through for a long time. And his wife Martha was well named, as in the story of Mary and Martha. She would do anything. A lot.
It's interesting how interims can be so key, especially when they were already part of the community, so they know. Yeah, and then Bishop Catherine Rotscombe, Bishop in charge. Would you call her time a time of interim, or would you call it sort of, because she was bishop in charge, more just almost more like a rectorship? What do you think?
I think I would call her something else. I would call her a transition. I think her presence was as a transitional priest in charge, not an interim, not a short-term interim who has a certain task to do, but because the ship was sailing forward, and Bishop Catherine was very savvy and able to guide us into those new years. And because she was a bishop, she had a lot of interesting contacts. I remember Alan Shin, whom I believe you met in Korea. Alan,
I met him in Hawaii, actually, and also here.
She had those kinds of relationships that enriched St. James a great deal.
Yeah, it's been a pretty bishopy scene. Is she the one who had Frank Griswold drop by?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah,
I think so too. Yeah, so and then there's now. So I'm just thinking about chapters. So if the Father Paul Kowaleski chapter is music, adult education, deep contemplative spirituality, and also that was the time of the centennial, and I think a real drive to grow,
right.
the church. Mm-hmm. And so now what chapter are we entering now? What are we writing right now? We're writing it.
Well, I think we're in the Kate Kress chapter, and it's one of the chapters of all.
That was not actually from you to say that. It was just, I'm thinking much more sort of what's the leitmotif of this chapter?
Well, regardless of what you think, I'm going to say it anyway, because I think that what you have brought is a wonderful energy and a style of leadership that is kindling a new life at St. James, and enabling us in our ministry development, in our liturgy, is enabling us to kind of come alive. It's almost like a time of a time of consolidation. Is now we're poised to be something else, and you've been a terrific inspiration in that area. Where it's going to go, God only.
Thank you. I think that both of us have a really strong grounding in the idea of distributed leadership as the most full expression of what it is to be a disciple. That it's just not a big daddy or a big mama telling us what to do. It's where are we being called to travel together. So I want to salute your work with the Ministry Council, this idea of bringing together the leaders of all the different ministries at St. James, and there's so many, and getting everyone to talk to each other numerous times a year and compare notes and give each other advice and really grow together and move together as a community, rather than being isolated, siloed, or ever feeling alone in the work. That's what makes me excited. We never saw a pandemic coming, that's for sure. So this is why I'm suspicious of 5-year plans, because life happens along the way. But I think what I feel more than anything else at St. James is people are so ready to be involved and to contribute to what's happening. And I feel like there's a real joyful spirit at this church that I love. And I think it's all those sort of currents that have been nurtured along the way, the extraordinary music, the amazing school, the deeply meaningful diversity that's why St. James is this kind of place that it is.
I agree, but I also think that the fact that you lived in Korea and lived in Africa has been a big factor in bringing all of us together, because I think understanding of those cultures has really enlivened us all together and made us even more appreciative of each other and aware of what it means to be in relationship.
We're just so radically blessed. I mean, every time I drive through Koreatown, I just get giddy, and I just think the whole world is here. We're all here together, and it's so enriching to be together. For instance, the African Christian Fellowship, they say all the time, any member of St. James is welcome. Not even anybody is welcome to their meetings. And if more people went, there would be even more fun would be had. More opportunities to really grow in understanding one another, not just once a year or twice a year, but any old Sunday. There's just all these opportunities to really dive deeply into one another's traditions.
And if we think about St. James as a story, and it's really God's story, of which St. James is a part, but within St. James community and its own evolution, if we think of it as an unfolding of chapters, that this in a way represents to me a consolidation of what Bob Oliver really started in St. James, recognizing the virtue of the diversity. So it didn't happen all on his watch, but we've been evolving and growing into it. And when we think about Nat King Cole being marginalized, we've come a long way, and it's
come a long way
of the Spirit's evolution and formation, in my view, and I think it's wildly exciting.
I know, and I'm very grateful to all the people from Korea, all the Asian Americans, all the Nigerians and Sierra Leoneans and Caribbean folks who have had the patience to stay here through thick and thin and continue to love and educate those around them so that we can continue to grow. I mean, I think it's probably taken and continues to take a lot of patience, and that's a blessing as well.
And we have that school side as well. We've got interaction as well on the school side. So the whole community is living into it.
And all of our unhoused friends who more and more show up at St. James, also expecting to be loved and included. And so, there's so many dimensions to this community, and I just can't wait till we can all be back together in a physical sense as well. So I'm gonna ask you, Neville, and you, Betsy, if you could just each share sort of a closing thought about it can be about St. James. It could be about your own story with St. James, something that you want to sort of leave us with.
Well, I just am so grateful for St. James and all that it's given me, and kind of my trajectory as a Christian. And I don't really remember my time at Emmanuel Presbyterian, which is, I guess, where it really started. But so what I remember really started with St. James School and the church, and just kind of the ways that where it's taken me, and the gifts that it gave me, and things to appreciate. And also it I think as a Christian, it's important to like ask questions. And also when I was the only student in my Sunday school class, I told my mom this was not going to fly. And so she said, okay, you can teach Sunday school. So I was co-teaching 4 and 5-year-olds. And I just remember this one child, Andrew Toplin, and this was, I don't know, early 90s. And he asked the question of, why did God make it so cold that the orange trees are freezing and the farmers are going to lose their citrus crops? And this was a really big deal that year. And I love that I didn't have the answer to that question. I don't know that I still do, but I love that, the inquisitiveness that he had, and that was fostered. And I think of that. I think of him all the time as questions come up for me, and wanting to, wanting to ask questions about my own faith. So.
That's a great anecdote. Thank you for that. And what about you, Betsy?
Well, I'm just very proud to be a part of St. James. I'm proud of a community, to be a part of a community that has evolved the way it has, and in good times and in not so good times, and has been faithful. People have been really faithful over the years to keep the vision and to stay with it. And I think we're seeing the fruit of all that right now.
And you are so much the fruit of all that. I mean, you've been such a shining light in all the chapters of St. James that we've talked about today. Thank you for everything that you do and are and mean to this community.
Thank you.
And thank you both for being on my show. I really appreciate it. It's been so much fun. And I never even got to ask you about some of your adventures together, but maybe give us a quick preview. Is it not true that in 2022, you're going to, what's the name of the famous Passion play?
In Oberammergau.
Yeah. That sounds very exciting. That was going to be this summer, right? Or this spring?
It was going to be last summer. And
last summer, okay.
Postponed it for 2 years. So we're going together.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
We just got back from a weekend away, and we have fun together.
I know, you guys are the best. You've got such a harmonious relationship. I love it. Well, thank you very much. And thank you everybody for tuning in. Stay safe, and we will see you soon, including live at 9 a.m. on Easter morning if you're interested, out on the field at St. James School. Bye for now, everyone.